Kayleigh McEnany, former White House press secretary for President Trump, has been out of the spotlight for nearly 2 months. But now she is speaking out in an exclusive interview. I'm Harris Faulkner, and you are in the Faulkner Focus. Kayleigh sat down with me for her first interview since leaving the White House, and we delved into a ton of topics, both professional and very personal. I started by asking her about the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot and what it was like inside the White House on that surreal and very emotional day.
You know, I think at the beginning of the day, before everyone went to the rally, everyone was expecting peace. We'd been to hundreds of rallies. I've probably been to hundreds at this point, certainly many dozens, and they were nothing but peaceful events. And we expected that day to be the same. And then as those events transpired, it was disbelief, shock, somber, sad, horrified by the violence, and it was a very hard, difficult day in the White House. There's no doubt, and that was a unifying feeling in the White House. And let me say that differently. It was I should say, widespread feeling, synonymous feeling, completely a feeling that everyone felt, just completely condemning the actions of that day, horrified and very somber.
There are critics of the president within his own party and those without who hold him to have responsibility in that day and what happened at the U.S. Capitol. Do you think that the former president, Donald J. Trump, holds responsibility for what happened at the riots?
I don't. And I think Senator Tim Scott said it best when I heard him say, you know, those who hold responsibility are those who committed those heinous actions that we all condemn. What those rioters did, and you know, if the left says he's responsible, he's incited this, or even other Republicans, what I would say to them, well, these rioters, you know, if they were so inspired by what the president was saying, they left the speech early because reportedly they showed up at the Capitol before the end of his speech. And then they did the exact opposite of what he said. He said march peacefully and patriotically, and they did the opposite. And everyone in the administration was horrified by it, mostly because, Harris, I have to say, this does not represent our movement. And I think a lot of people forget, before I was in the White House, I was on the campaign trail. And one of the things I love to do, and I did at every rally, was I went in the crowd with a microphone and just talked to these people. And I spent hours and hours of my time just talking to these people. And what was so sad to me that day is this was not the people that I met. This was not, when I was walking through the crowd at a rally, the woman who ran up to my pregnant belly, put her hands on my belly and said, "Can I pray for your daughter?" This was not the man I met days before Christmas Eve, who was out because of the First Step Act, who was sent to prison for a nonviolent offense and was out because of President Trump, and thanked me and thanked him for what he did. And this was not the veteran who literally told me he was about to commit suicide, and then President Trump came and was his voice and his hero and fixed the VA. Those people are the 75 million people, not these people. They do not represent our movement. They are the opposite of our movement, which is what I said at the podium, and is what President Trump has said and will repeat.
Let's talk a little bit about the timeline of the day and the call for the National Guard, the call for help. What was going on inside the White House as that was playing out? Because you and the president worked on a different timeline in terms of getting that message out that night.
I can only speak to the conversations that I had that day, and there was a unitary focus on peace and making sure that every resource available to the Capitol police officers was available to them. I'm not in the chain of command. I'm not part of the operations in the White House. I'm a spokesperson. But the sense I got from every conversation I had was sending help immediately as soon as possible. And even President Trump said on Sunday evening, you know, I offered 10,000 National Guard, and they should have taken them. He knew it would be a big event, and he wanted peace. And every person in that administration, people who have worked on the Hill, like the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and many people who worked for me, they took it very personally, because that was their former place of employment, and we all did. This is our country.
We heard the recording of House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy apparently on the phone having a tough conversation with the president about that. You composed and delivered your own statement the day after. What was that like, that process for you?
It was a hard day. January 6th everyone was focused on stopping what was happening. And January 7th was a real day where you were just taking in the horrors that we saw. It was emotional. That morning at my house, I did a family press conference, if you will, and we put my family on speakerphone. My mom was there, my daughter was sleeping, and got my husband and my dad there, and we prayed together. And it was hard, and there were tears because that, as I said, those people do not represent the people I know and love in the Trump movement. And as I was praying, my assistant, who's an amazing woman of faith like me, sent me what is a palm card, which is your daily schedule.
Yes.
And instead of a schedule, she just had Bible verses that she had handpicked. As I was reading these Bible verses, I knew I needed to go to the podium. I knew that's what Christ would want me to do. I knew it's what, as a woman of faith, I needed to do. And my assistant was a huge part in having me have that revelation. And I went to the president, asked him if I could go to the podium. He said, absolutely. And we talked about him giving remarks, and he was totally on board and supportive.
So we got to see number 45, former President Trump, at CPAC. The first time with him really back in action since he left office. What were your first impressions? Everything
he said strikes at the very heart, I think, of as to what made this movement pro-family, pro-worker. He changed the Republican Party forever. There's no doubt. And I recognize that early on in 2015, 2016, the ideas he was proffering were not things you often heard from Republicans on trade in particular, and on immigration, his resolute stance. And to hear him re-articulate those principles and see that energy, he's changed this party for a long time to come, and in a way that's very positive.
He talked about the future for really the first time substantively that we have heard since he left office. What did he say that you recognized, and what did he say that you were surprised by?
I was not surprised by anything he said, but I think one thing that needs to be said, though, is that he has grown this party in a way that I think members of the Republican Party should recognize. He got the highest percentage of the black vote of any Republican candidate running for national office in 20 years, highest percentage of the Hispanic vote of any Republican running for office in 16 years. He has made this party more inclusive, more expansive, more welcoming. And I think that Republicans on the Hill, who are so quick to say President Trump doesn't have a place in this party, they need to look at the numbers and why these new voters, who aren't typically Republican voters, came to the party. And it's because he offered economic hope and opportunity to a lot of people who did not have that.
Why do you think he has made the decision that he's not going to start his own party?
I think he knows that for the betterment of his movement, fixing the Republican Party is the answer.
Now you say fixing. Let me cut in there. What do you mean by that? And if this is truly his party, doesn't he still have to fix it? What's broken?
I think when I say fixing, it was fixed in 2015, 2016 and made more inclusive, speaking to those Rust Belt Democrats who came to the Republican Party, broadening the party. I do think he fixed it by giving us a strong focus on trade and protecting blue-collar workers. But there's a push to go back to the status quo. There's a push to exile him, to exile his movement, to try to cancel
within the Republican Party?
I think there is. I think you see that by members on the Hill who say the president doesn't have a place in this party. But, my message to them is let the people decide. There are 75 million incredible people, and they'll decide the way this movement goes forward.
Can he do it again?
I think he can do it again. I think, look, it's up to him whether to run in 2024. There are some incredible men and women in our party who are walking in the same kind of Trump ideology. Governor Ron DeSantis, amazing. Kristi Noem, Vice President Pence, a great man of faith that the evangelical community loves and adores, and he's a supporter of the Trump movement. When you look at the way forward, I think that you find a home in those names and certainly in President Trump.
And it is my distinct pleasure today to welcome Kayleigh McEnany to the Fox family. We will be seeing much more of her in the future. And coming up just a bit later this hour, more from Kayleigh, including meeting the challenges of being a new mom while serving in the White House.